What's up, everybody? Thanks for clicking this video. Thanks for tuning into my channel. My name is Simon Hill, Black American from Louisiana, coming to you live from Budapest, Hungary. Today is June 14th, 2026, about 1:40 p.m. where I'm at right now. And we are continuing our 22nd book in our Book to React series, even though this is about 3 books in one. We are in Leon Trotsky's The History of the Russian Revolution, episode 27, where today we will read chapter 26, the month of the Great Slander. As we were, as we were discussing in our previous episodes, Trotsky is going over the vicious counter-revolution that the bourgeois government is now inflicting upon the Soviets, the workers, the soldiers, the peasants, who have come together to try to take back their society. And, Trotsky goes into great detail about how counter-revolution should be expected. We should expect the empire to strike back. And so now Trotsky is going to continue to talk about the repression that was against the Bolsheviks and the Soviets. We have both live streams going right now. We have the horizontal live stream and the vertical live stream going simultaneously. So I'm looking forward to reacting to the comments that are coming in. Please take note of the pinned comment at the top because that is serious. It's absolutely serious. You will instantly get banned, blocked, sent to the re-education camp, the gulag, however you want to frame it, if you come in here causing discord. Okay? Without further ado, let's jump into chapter 26, the month of the Great Slander. Trotsky says, during that night of July 4th, when the 200 members of both executive committees, the workers, soldiers, and the peasants, were sitting around between fruitless sessions, a mysterious rumor arrived among them. Material had been discovered connecting Lenin with the German general staff. Tomorrow, the newspapers would publish the documents. The gloomy augurs of the Presidium, crossing the hall on their way to one of those endless conferences behind the scenes, responded unwillingly and evasively even to questions from their nearest friends. The Tauride Palace, already almost abandoned by the outside public, was bewildered. Lenin, in the service of the German staff? Amazement, alarm, malicious pleasure drew the delegates together in excited groups. It goes without saying, says Sukhanov, who was very hostile to the Bolsheviks in the July days, that not one person really connected with the revolution doubted for an instant that these rumors were all nonsense. But those with a revolutionary past constituted an insignificant minority among the members of the executive committee. March revolutionists, accidental elements caught up by the first wave, predominated even in the ruling Soviet institutions. Among those provincials, town clerks, shopkeepers, heads of villages, deputies were to be found with a definitely Black Hundred odor. These people immediately began to feel at home. Just what was to be expected. They had known it all along. All right. Shout out to Mike up in Minnesota. Shout out to Minnesota. I spent the summer in Minnesota back in 2010. Had a great time. Had a great time in Minneapolis and St. Paul. Didn't know that many Somalis were out there. Didn't know that many people from many different African nations were out there. Minnesota is a beautiful place. Minneapolis is very diverse. It was my first time being outside of the deep South. And so, yeah, I really, really have a lot of love for Minnesota, for the diversity, for the open-mindedness. Even though that is the site of the murder of George Floyd, it is still a place I hold precious in my heart. I have very vivid and fond memories of my time in Minneapolis. But going here, back to the text, what Trotsky is saying here is very interesting and very relevant for our situation right now, because people tend to assume that communist influence has to be from elsewhere. Oftentimes in my comment section, I hear something like, oh, this is Russian propaganda, or it looks like the Russian check cleared or something like that. And people tend to think that everything that happens organically inside a country when people are demanding socialism, demanding for an end to capitalism, demanding for the workers to have rights, et cetera, that has to be from elsewhere. And what's even more funny is that a lot of these conspiracy theories tend to fall in line with anti-Semitism. There's a lot of people, especially on YouTube, and I posted this on my channel the other day, who tend to think that the Jews were behind everything. And they believe the Jews were behind the Soviet Revolution. But literally, think about this. At the time of the Russian Revolution, the rumors were that Lenin, who has Jewish heritage, was actually being funded by Germany, the Aryans, the master race. Think about that, man. So once again, it goes to show that the more things change, the more they stay the same, or history tends to rhyme or fall into a certain pattern, because the same sort of arguments people say about us communists, about us socialists now, they said the same thing generally back then. If I were to come out and start running for office, or other Reds were to come out and start running for office, they're going to start saying, oh, these people must be funded by some outside force. And then the right wing are going to say, oh, these people were funded by the Jews, et cetera, et cetera. Absolutely ridiculous, anti-Semitic, and reactionary. And we stand against anti-Semitism and reactionaryism here. And one more thing. Does this not also show that right-wingers are prone to conspiratorial thinking? Isn't that one of the worst things about being a right-winger? I couldn't understand being a right-winger, because the first thing you have to do is put your mind in the same state as someone who thinks the earth is flat, and that there was a master conspiracy throughout centuries to trick people into thinking the earth is round. I don't know how they do it, but I think that goes to show that, we are on a better side of history. Okay? So let's go here. Mike is saying, we have love here for everyone. Awesome food, lots of blending cultures. Glad you had a good time here. Come back. Would love to come back to Minnesota and get involved with some socialists or communists or any sort of activists that are happening out there, because the front lines are everywhere in America. If you're south of the Canadian border, as our hero Malcolm X said, you're in the South. So even though I said I went to Minnesota and escaped the South, or got out of the deep South, you're never out of the South in America. America is the fucking South. All right. But anyway, I'm going to continue here. Alarmed by this unforeseen and too abrupt turn of events, the leaders sparred for time. Chedsey and Setzarelli suggested to the newspapers by telephone that they refrain from printing the sensational exposure as unverified. The editors did not dare ignore this request from the Tauride Palace, except one of them. The small yellow sheet published by one of the sons of Suverin, the powerful publisher of Novoye Vremya, served up to its readers the next morning an official-sounding document about Lenin's receiving directions and money from the German government. The censorship was thus broken, and within a day, the whole press was full of this sensation. Thus began the most incredible episode of a year rich in events. The leaders of a revolutionary party whose lives for decades have been passed in a struggle against rulers, both crowned and uncrowned, found themselves portrayed before the country and the whole world as hired agents of the Hohenzollern, or Germany. On a scale hitherto unheard of, this slander was sown in the thick of the popular masses, a vast majority of whom had heard of the Bolshevik leaders for the first time only after the February Revolution. Mudslinging here became a political factor of primary importance. This makes necessary an attentive examination of its mechanism. So I believe that this chapter that we're going to read today is going to be vitally important for us right now, living in 2026, because what is the primary method that the right wing uses to continue to recruit and continue to discredit the left? It is bullshit propaganda. Ben Shapiro, Steven Crowder, Candace Owens, basically coming on YouTube and all of our social media platforms, Andrew Tate, whoever you want to throw in there, continually spreading false and misleading propaganda and misinformation. And so what I think Trotsky is going to do here is talk about how the Bolsheviks countered this bullshit conspiracy theory that the government of Russia made up, that Lenin was somehow sponsored by the Germans. That German dark money. German dark money. What would that be? That's insane. I'm trying to think of an acronym that would be funny for that. But it's incredible to think about how right-wingers rely on conspiracy theories to get their point across, because they don't have arguments. They have to go to the puppeteer sort of thinking, that there are masterminds pulling the strings, the Illuminati, the Masons, et cetera, rather than the fact that their leaders are literally pedophiles. Literally everything they say can be applied to their leaders, like Elon Musk begging Jeffrey Epstein to go to Little St. John. Oh, Jeffrey, I heard you have great parties. I would love to attend. Or Donald Trump being on video pointing at women with Jeffrey Epstein, being like, yeah, she looks hot over there. Oh, and she barely looks legal. Come on now. Come on now, absolutely insane. I'm going to continue here. The primary source of this sensational document was the testimony of a certain Ermolenko. The image of this hero is sufficiently delineated by the official records. In the period from the Japanese War to 1913, he was an agent of the intelligence service. In 1913, for reasons not established, he was discharged from service with the title of ensign from the ranks. In 1914, he was called to service in the army, gallantly permitted himself to be captured, and became a police spy among the war prisoners. The regime of a concentration camp was not to this spy's taste. However, and at the insistence of his friends, so he testifies, he took service with the Germans, needless to say, with patriotic aims. Here, a new chapter opened in his life. On April 25th, this ensign from the ranks was thrown over the Russian front by the German military authorities for the purpose of dynamiting bridges, reporting military secrets, struggling for the independence of Ukraine, and agitating for a separate peace. The German officers, Captains Sheditsky and Liebers, in contracting with Ermolenko for these services, informed him in passing, without any practical necessity, and evidently merely in order to keep up his spirits, that besides the ensign himself, Lenin would be working in Russia in the same direction. That was the foundation of the whole affair. So once again, oh God. Okay, so this, if I'm understanding the story right, Trotsky is saying here is that there was a Russian guy who got captured by the Germans and essentially flipped. He essentially became a double agent. So he starts working with the enemy, and then he's sent back to Russia to agitate against Russia to not succeed in World War I and fighting against Germany. And then he's just told by his handlers that Lenin is doing the same thing too. Absolutely crazy. Absolutely. And is this not like every other right-wing conspiracy? Essentially, every accusation is a confession when it comes to right-wingers. They say that we're un-American, that we don't care about people. Meanwhile, they steal literal money from the American people. They say that we don't care about children. Meanwhile, they have sex with children. Come on now. Come on now. Make it make sense. Make it make sense. Anyway. All right. Mike says, a thief, a pedo, and a liar walk into a bar. The bartender says, what can I get you, Mr. President? Absolutely good. That's a good joke. I'm going to use that. I'm going to use that next time. I'm going to tell my wife that joke later that day. Okay? Continuing here. Who or what suggested to Ermolenko his testimony about Lenin? Not the German officers in any case. A simple juxtaposition of dates and facts will introduce us into the intellectual workshop of the ensign. On April 4th, Lenin issued his famous theses, constituting a declaration of war against the February regime. On April 20th and 21st occurred the armed demonstration against a continuance of the war. The attack upon Lenin at that time became a veritable hurricane. On the 25th, Ermolenko was thrown over the front, and during the first half of May was getting in contact with the intelligence service at headquarters. Ambiguous newspaper articles demonstrating that the policy of Lenin was advantageous to the Kaiser gave birth to the idea that Lenin was a German agent. Officers and commissars at the front, struggling with the irrepressible Bolshevism of the soldiers, were still less ceremonious in their forms of expression. When the talk was about Lenin, Ermolenko promptly plunged into these waters. Whether he himself thought up the dragged-in remark about Lenin, whether it was suggested to him by some outside person, or whether it was cooperatively manufactured by Ermolenko and the officials of the intelligence service, has no great significance. The demand for slanders against the Bolsheviks had reached such intensity that a supply could not fail to turn up. The chief of the headquarters staff, General Denikin, future generalissimo of the White Guard in the Civil War, himself not very much higher in his outlook than the agents of the Tsarist secret police, attributed or pretended to attribute great importance to the testimony of Ermolenko and turned it over to the war minister on May 16th with an appropriate letter. Kerensky, we may assume, exchanged opinions with Cesarelli or Chedzi, who could hardly have failed to put a curb on the righteous indignation. That evidently explained why the thing went no further. Kerensky wrote later that although Ermolenko had testified to a connection of Lenin with the German staff, he did so not with sufficient credibility. The reports of Ermolenko-Denikin thus remained for a month and a half under a bushel. The intelligence service dismissed Ermolenko as superfluous, and the ensign wandered off to the Far East to drink away the money he had received from two sources. Does this not sound very familiar to the story of the snitch who ratted out Fred Hampton so that the Chicago police could murder Fred Hampton in his sleep? That was a guy who was essentially recruited because he was a bum and he was a traitor to the cause. And then, he just ends up getting a few silver coins from the CIA or the FBI and then drinks his life away and then commits that later. Does this not sound very familiar? This Ermolenko guy was untrustworthy. He was a double agent. He didn't care about Russia or Germany. He was just going along with the wind. He sounded like an idiot. And here he comes just making up rumors that Trotsky was, that Lenin was somehow a German spy. Okay? All right. So we have to send some people to the gulag. Okay? All right, we got to send some people to the gulag. Would anybody like to be a commissar? Because I don't have time today to be sending all these people to the gulag. All right, I have Mike in the live stream or Atlantis in the live stream. I would like to know if you would like to be a commissar. A commissar gives you the power to send people to the gulag, which is banning them from the channel, or to the re-education camp, which is putting them on timeout for, an indefinite amount of time. If you would like to be a commissar, say yes. And also, I will ask you a question to verify that you are credible to be able to have this enormous power. If not, I will continue to maintain the fort by sending white supremacists, fascists, trolls to the gulag. And that's it. And giving commentary on the book. Let's continue here. Okay, John Cassiano says yes. Okay, so John Cassiano says he wants to be a commissar. My question for you, John Cassiano, what are the 3 best Marxist books you've ever read? Or what do you think are the 3 essential texts not written by Marx that every Marxist should read? I would like to know. John Cassiano, answer that question thoughtfully, and you will then have powers as commissar. So, 3 best Marxist texts that you've read, or the 3 best Marxist texts not written by Marx that you think every Marxist should read. Okay? All right, let's go here. We have to send some people to the gulag as well. All right. Alan Ward says 1984. That's not a Marxist text. That's not a Marxist text. We're talking about theory, not fiction. Not fiction. Non-fiction, of course. That 1984 does not make sense. All right, let's continue here. So, the events of the July days, however, revealing the danger of Bolshevism in its full stature, called to mind the exposures of Ermolenko. He was hastily summoned from Blagoveshchensk, but owing to a sheer lack of imagination, he could not, in spite of all cluckings and jerkings of the reins, add one word to his original testimony. By that time, however, the Department of Justice and the Intelligence Service were working under full steam. Inquiries about the possible criminal connections of the Bolsheviks were addressed to politicians, generals, gendarmes, merchants, innumerable people of any and every profession. The respectable Tsarist secret police conducted themselves in this investigation with considerably more discretion than the brand new representatives of democratic justice. Such evidence, wrote a former chief of the Petrograd secret police, the venerable General Gorbachev, as that Lenin worked in Russia to her injury and on German money, was not, at least during my period of service, in the possession of the secret police. Another secret police officer, Yakubov, chief of the intelligence department at the Petrograd military district, testified, "I know nothing of a connection between Lenin and his followers and the German general staff, but I also know nothing of the resources upon which Lenin worked." Thus, from the institutions of the Tsarist spy system, which had kept watch of Bolshevism from its very inception, nothing useful could be squeezed out. So here's a question. Here's a question that I have for the audience. A lot of us leftists are scared of the intelligence agencies. We hear FBI, CIA, ATF, and all the other secrets, because America has 13? 13? They have somewhere in the teens of intelligence services, which is incredible to think about. And with a black box budget, they could just sort of do whatever. A lot of us are very scared of it because we think about the black sites, we think about Guantanamo, we think about how they murdered some of our heroes, like Fred Hampton, who I mentioned before. Is that fear, though it is well-founded, justified when in the light of history? Because when we look at, what our, ideological forerunners did, like Trotsky, like Lenin, they were up against an intelligence service too that could have carried out assassinations, could have infiltrated, the Soviets or the meetings or the party through spies and other networks and channels and stuff like that. I feel like a lot of inaction done on the left is out of fear. Okay, I think a lot of inaction is done by fear. All right, Alan Ward's is listing books that are fictional. If you are listing fictional books, that shows where your mind is. And a lot of these books are books we read in high school. And if Alan Ward is on this thing, he's probably in his 30s, like me. You know what I'm saying? Because I look at the demographics of the people that are coming into my channel. And so if you're listing books that we read in high school, back in 2002, 2004, 2006, my God, that shows where you are mentally. You know what I'm saying? So yeah, we have to send some people out of here. Once again, pay attention. Pay attention to the pinned comment because I will easily send you to the gulag. I don't give a fuck. I don't give a fuck, okay? So, John Cassiano says, Robert Greene. Okay, so John Cassiano, you cannot be a commissar because once again, that is not a Marxist text. I can tell. All right, continuing here. However, when people seek long, especially if they are armed with power, they find something in the end. A certain Z. Bernstein, a merchant by official calling, opened the eyes of the Provisional Government to a German espionage organization in Stockholm, headed by Parvus, a well-known German social democrat of Russian origin. According to the testimony of Bernstein, Lenin was in contact with the organization through the Polish revolutionists, Ganetsky and Kozlowski. Kerensky wrote later, some extraordinary serious data. Unfortunately, not of a legal, but merely of a secret police character, were to receive absolutely unquestionable confirmation with the arrival in Russia of Ganetsky, who had been arrested on the border, and were to be converted into authentic judicial material against the Bolshevik staff. Kerensky knew in advance into what this material would be converted. So once again, they're digging, okay? They're digging, trying to find something on Lenin. And what they're now doing is just reaching for straws. And I guess if you dig hard enough on anybody, you could find some type of dirt. And that's what they're doing to Lenin right here. All right? The testimony of the merchant, Bernstein, concerned the trade operations of Ganetsky and Kozlowski between Petrograd and Stockholm. This wartime commerce, which evidently had recourse at times to a code correspondence, had no relation to politics. The Bolshevik Party had no relation to this commerce. Lenin and Trotsky had publicly denounced Parvus, who combined good commerce with bad politics, and, in printed words, had appealed to the Russian revolutionists to break off all relations with him. But who was there in the swirlpool of events who had time to look into all of this? An espionage organization in Stockholm that sounded plain enough. And so, the light unsuccessfully ignited by the hand of Ensign Ermolenko flared up from another direction. To be sure, here too they ran into a difficulty. The head of the intelligence service of the General Staff, Prince Turkestanov, to the query of an investigator into the especially important affair of Alexandrov, had answered, Z. Bernstein is a person not deserving the slightest confidence. Bernstein is an unscrupulous type of businessman who will not stop at any kind of undertaking. But could Bernstein's bad reputation stand in the way of an attempt to besmirch the reputation of Lenin? No, Kerensky did not hesitate to recognize the testimony of Bernstein as extraordinarily serious. Henceforth, the investigation was off on the Stockholm scent. The exposures of a spy who had been in the service of two general staffs and an unscrupulous businessman, not deserving the slightest confidence, lay at the foundation of that utterly fantastic accusation against a revolutionary party which a nation of 160 million were about to raise to the supreme power. So once again, right-wingers, I don't know how you do it. I don't know how you do it. I don't know how right-wingers think so conspiratorially and really, really believe it. Because what they're doing here is grabbing some guy who is a failed businessman, who is a liar, who was unsuccessful in other ventures of his life, but just so happened to luck up and end up at a high rank in the military. And now he's just saying, yeah, I think, Lenin might be funded by the Germans. But then again, that is in character with right-wingers. They tend to elevate people who, in any other circumstance, you would consider them to be lesser than. You select failed businessmen. You select liars. You select pedophiles. You select sexist, racist, white supremacists. And elevate them, because that's what white supremacy does. That's what white supremacy does, and that's what, bourgeois thinking does under capitalism. All right? We have to send some people to the gulag. Yes, I love it. I love it. I love it. I love sending people to the gulag. Get the fuck out of here. Who else? If you want to go to the gulag, step up. Step up. You can go to Siberia. It's very nice in summer. It's very nice in summer here. Okay? It's very nice in summer. Yep, Kevin's got to go too. Kevin, get out of here. Get on that train, boy. Get on that train, boy. Yeah. We doing that. We sending them to the gulag. Make them big rocks and the little rocks till your back blow out, bitch. Continuing here. But how did it happen that the materials of a preliminary investigation appeared in print? And moreover, just at that moment, when the shattered offensive of Kerensky was becoming a catastrophe, and the July demonstration in Petrograd was revealing the irresistible growth of the Bolsheviks, one of the initiators of this business, the Attorney General Bessarabov, later frankly described in the press how, when it became clear that the Provisional Government in Petrograd was wholly without reliable armed forces, it was decided in the district headquarters to try to create a psychological change in the regiments by means of some strong medicine. The substance of the documents was communicated to representatives of the Preobrazhensky regiment nearest to headquarters. Those present observed what an overwhelming impression the communication made. From that moment, it was clear what a powerful weapon was in the hands of the government. After this successful experimental test, these conspirators from the Department of Justice, the Intelligence Service, and the General Staff hastened to make known their discoveries of the Minister of Justice. Paravezov, these Russian names, Paravezov answered that no official communication could be issued, but that by the members of the Provisional Government who were present, no obstacle would be put in the way of a private initiative. The names of the judicial and staff officials were rightly judged in opposite to the best interest of the business. In order to get the sensational slander into circulation, a political figure was needed. By the method of private initiative, the conspirators had no difficulty in finding exactly the personage they needed. A former revolutionist, a member of the Second Duma, a shrieking orator, and a passionate lover of intrigue, Alensky had once stood on the extreme left flanks of the Bolsheviks. Lenin had been a hopeless opportunist in his eyes. In the years of reaction, Alensky had created a special ultra-left group, which he had continued to lead from abroad until the war, at the beginning of which he took an ultra-patriotic position and straightaway made a specialty of accusing all and everybody of being in the service of the Kaiser. Does this not sound like Eldridge Cleaver? If Lenin is Huey P. Newton, then this guy, Alensky, sounds like Eldridge Cleaver. Ran away to a foreign country and start advocating for an extreme left position, starts calling the main guy a coward, a sellout, et cetera, et cetera. Does this not sound like what we studied in Huey P. Newton's Revolutionary Suicide? Another text that you should check out on this channel. But anyway, continuing here. Along this line, he developed an extensive espionage business in Paris in company with Russian and French patriots of the same type. The Paris Association of Foreign Journalists, that is, the correspondents of allied and neutral countries, a very patriotic and by no means austere body, found it necessary in a special resolution to declare Alensky a dishonest slanderer and expel him from its midst. Arriving in Petrograd with this attestation after the February Revolution, Alensky made an attempt made an attempt in the character of a former left to get into the executive committee. In spite of all their tolerance, the Mensheviks and social revolutionaries, by a resolution of April 11th, shut the door in his face, suggesting that he make an attempt to reestablish his honor. That was easy to propose. Having decided that he was better fitted to besmirch others than rehabilitate himself, Alinsky got into connection with the intelligence service and laid hold of a national field of operation from his instinct for intrigue. By the second half of July, he had already begun to include Mensheviks too in the widening circles of his slanders. A leader of the later party, Dan, abandoning the policy of watchful waiting, printed in the official Soviet Izvestia, June 22nd, a letter of protest. It is time to put an end to the doings of a man officially denounced as a dishonest slanderer. Is it not clear that Thermos, inspired by Ermolenko and Bernstein, could find no better intermediary between himself and public opinion than Alinsky? It was his signature which adorned the documents of the exposure. So if you weren't around for the previous chapter, Trotsky talks about what made the Bolsheviks successful. What made the Bolsheviks successful is that they allowed the people to catch up to the program. Remember, Russia is a country of 160 million people, one of the largest countries population-wise in the world, as far as we know, of that time, at the beginning of the 20th century. And, 20 million people were involved in the Soviets, in building the Soviet project in the very beginning of the February Revolution. But still, that is a minority in a country that large. And a lot of people had not even heard of the Bolsheviks. So what the Bolsheviks allowed to happen is they let the people catch up. They let the people see the contradictions within their society. They let the people see that the bourgeoisie was not actually meeting their needs. They weren't going to end the disastrous war, World War I, that Russia got involved in only for the sake of profiteering for the rich business owners and capitalists of Russia at that time, and they weren't going to raise the living conditions and the working conditions of the working masses, and also the peasants who were just told to fuck off, So yeah, they allowed the people to catch up and see the contradictions of their society were not actually improving, or they were not being resolved. So that's what the Bolsheviks did. The extreme left position of the Bolsheviks was that the Bolsheviks should have seized power right after the February Revolution. After the February Revolution, some Bolsheviks were saying, we got this. We got the Soviet. We took over Petrograd. Many other Soviets are popping up right now. Let's go topple the executive committee, the bourgeois government that still remains. And so Lenin, in all of his wisdom, said no. The main Bolsheviks said no. In fact, what Trotsky has been teaching us throughout this text is that throughout, the Bolsheviks were not the main fucking leaders of the revolution. They were just following along with the people. The people were continually pressing, get rid of this executive committee, get rid of this bourgeois government. Let's actually do something to make this society better. And the Bolsheviks were like, wait. But the extreme left position, guys like Alinsky, probably got frustrated that the main leaders of the Bolsheviks were saying, that we should wait. And then, and what he was probably saying is like, we should topple this government right now. All right. Robin says, didn't he go to school in Switzerland? Did Lenin go to school? No, he went into hiding in Switzerland. Okay. All right. Who else has to go? Okay. Yeah, we have to send Adele Mosier out of here too. Adele Mosier's got to go. Okay. Anyway, I'm going to continue here. It's also one more thing. It's very interesting. How extreme left-wingers end up becoming right-wingers. Because it sounds like the guy Alinsky ended up becoming a right-winger because they said he returned to Russia and became an extreme patriot and stuff like that. It's very interesting how people who, started out on the left of the left end up going full-on right. I'm not trying to advocate for horseshoe theory, but that's something just very interesting. It's not a common or very common occurrence, but it has happened notably. For example, Max Eastman, the person that translated this text that we're reading right now, Trotsky's History of the Russian Revolution, ended up becoming a Republican, ended up becoming like the forefather of neocon thought. You know what I mean? We might not have had the two wars in Iraq had Max Eastman not become a right-winger, you know what I'm saying, an anti-communist. But I believe Max Eastman became an anti-communist because he was just so disappointed that Trotsky didn't take power in the Soviet Union. Max Eastman was an extreme follower of Trotsky. So I think that's where that all stems from. But continuing here, Trotsky says in the text, behind the scenes, the minister socialists protested against the handing over of these documents to the press, as also did two of the bourgeois ministers, Nekrasov and Tereshchenko. On the day of their publication, June 5th, Pereverzev, with whom the government had already been willing to part, found himself obliged to resign. The Mensheviks passed the hint that this was their victory. Kerensky subsequently asserted that the minister had been removed for being too hasty with the exposure, thus hindering the course of the investigation. In any case, Pereverzev, with his departure, if not with his presence in the government, gave satisfaction to everybody. Okay? All right, we're sending people to the re-education camp. Actually come in here and deal with the text or answer the questions. Do not come in here trolling or just shit posting, okay? This will get you instantly kicked out. All right, on that same day, Zinoviev appeared at a sitting of the Bureau of the Executive Committee and in the name of the Central Committee of the Bolsheviks demanded that immediate measures be taken to exonerate Lenin and to prevent possible consequences of the slander. The Bureau could not refuse to appoint a commission of inquiry. Sukhanov writes, the commission itself understood that what needed investigation was not the question of Lenin selling out Russia, but only of the sources of the slander. But the commission ran into the jealous competition of the institutions of justice and the intelligence service, which had every reason not to desire outside interference in their trade. To be sure, the Soviet bodies had not up to that time had any difficulty in getting the better of the governmental bodies when they found it necessary. But the July days have produced a serious shift of power to the right. And moreover, the Soviet Commission was in no hurry to fulfill a task obviously in conflict with the political interest of those who had entrusted it. The more serious of the compromised leaders, that is, properly speaking, only the Mensheviks, were concerned to establish a formal disconnection with the slander, but nothing more. In all cases where it was impossible to avoid making some direct answer, they would, in a few words, clear themselves of guilt. But they did not extend a finger to ward off the poisoned sword poised over the head of the Bolsheviks. A popular image of their policy was once provided by the Roman proconsul Pilate. Yes, and could they behave otherwise without betraying themselves? It was only the slander against Lenin that in the July days turned away a part of the garrison from the Bolsheviks. If the compromisers had made a fight against the slander, it is easy to imagine that the battalion of Izmailovosti would have stopped singing the Marseillaise in honor of the executive committee and gone back to their barracks, if not for the palace of Kashenskaya. So, basically, what Trotsky is saying here is that, the Bolsheviks were sort of in a damned if they do, damned if they don't situation. The government, the fake bourgeois government, is accusing Lenin of being a German spy, essentially triggering the right-wingers by calling him trans. Think about it today. What triggers right-wingers? Hey, that guy's trans. Hey, get him, guys. So, yeah, that's what they're doing. They're spreading lies and bullshit. So the Bolsheviks are like, damned if we do, damned if we don't. Sort of like Pontius Pilate was in a situation. If I kill Jesus, I might kill an innocent man. If I don't kill Jesus, I might upset the Pharisees of Israel or Palestine, who might be upset that I let this slanderer against their religion go. So what do the Bolsheviks do? Do they get involved with investigating their top guy, Lenin, and give credence to this fake propaganda bullshit that the fake government is giving up, that Lenin is somehow trans, aka a German spy? Or do they disregard it and just sort of let the slander continue to flourish? I think also what's very important from this paragraph that we should learn is that nationalism is such a powerful force. All the people here in Russia hated the war. The war was unpopular. Nobody liked World War I. This is when Russian men were sent out to die for no fucking reason other than to make rich people richer. But yet and still, when they hear that a guy who's saying he wants to end the war works for another country, now all of a sudden they are like, oh no, we gotta get this guy out of here. Even if it's a foreigner, even if he's not a foreigner, telling them that they should get out of the war, just the idea, the rumor that Lenin was a trans Russian gay black woman was enough to trigger the right wing to go all out, okay? Anyway, in line with the general policy of the Mensheviks, the Minister of the Interior, Tsetserelli, who took the responsibility for the arrest of Bolsheviks soon to follow, did indeed, under pressure from the Bolshevik faction, announce at a meeting of the executive committee that he personally did not suspect the Bolshevik leaders of espionage, but that he did accuse them of conspiracy and armed insurrection. On July 13th, Lieber, in introducing a resolution which in essence outlawed the Bolshevik Party, deemed it necessary to remark, I myself consider that the accusations directed against Lenin and Zinoviev have no foundation. Such declarations were met by all in gloomy silence. To the Bolsheviks, they seemed dishonorably evasive. To the patriots, superfluous or unprofitable. Speaking on the 17th at a joint session of the two executive committees, Trotsky said, an intolerable atmosphere has been created in which you, as well as we, are choking. They are throwing dirty accusations at Lenin and Zinoviev. Voice, that is true. Uproar, Trotsky continues. It's so funny that he's writing about himself in the third person. There are, in this hall, it appears, people who sympathize with these accusations. There are people here who have only sneaked into the revolution. Uproar, the crowd goes crazy. Ah! The president's bell long tries to restore order. Lenin has fought 30 years for the revolution. I have fought 20 years against the oppression of the people. And we cannot but cherish a hatred for German militarism. A suspicion against us in that direction could be expressed only by those who do not know what a revolutionist is. I have been sentenced by a German court to 8 months imprisonment for my struggle against German militarism. This everybody knows. Let nobody in this hall say that we are hirelings of Germany, for that is not the voice of convinced revolutionists, but the voice of scoundrels. Crowd goes crazy. Ah, bitches start throwing their panties at Trotsky. Thus, the episode was reported in the anti-Bolshevik publications of the day. The Bolshevik publications were already closed. It is necessary to explain, however, that the applause came from a small left sector. A part of the deputies bellowed with hatred. The majority were silent. No one, however, even of the direct agents of Kerensky, ascended the tribune to support the official version of the accusation or even indirectly to defend it. So, once again, Trotsky goes on stage and says, all of us who are on the left, all of us who are Bolsheviks, hate this thing that you're accusing us of. We hate German militarism. German militarism is what started destroying Russia. Germany dragging Russia into this war, fighting against Russians, killing Russians, etc., is one of the things that we stand against. Similar to how, right now, every leftist is being accused of anti-Semitism, when we are the ones who are on the front lines fighting against Nazis and fascists, in the street, online, doing propaganda. Leftists, communists, socialists hate anti-Semitism. We love our Jewish brothers and sisters. We do not at any point advocate for hatred or discrimination against Jewish people. But what we stand against is Zionism. So that's the same thing that's happening here. Trotsky is saying, we hate German militarism. We are not German spies, even though you throw this accusation out against us just because we want Russia to leave the war. The same way we want Israel to leave the West Bank, Lebanon, Gaza, basically everybody in the Middle East alone. That does not mean that we hate Jewish people. We do not hate Jewish people. We love our Jewish brothers and sisters. Absolutely. Our Jewish comrades are some of the illest, some of the trillest, some of the realest. You get what I'm saying? Anyway, I continue here. In Moscow, where the struggle between Bolsheviks and compromisers had in general assumed a milder character, only to become so much the more cruel in October. A joint session of the two Soviets, the workers and soldiers, passed a resolution on July 10th to publish and paste up a manifesto in which it shall be declared that the accusation of espionage against the Bolshevik faction is a slander and a plot of the counter-revolution. The Petrograd Soviet, more directly dependent upon governmental combinations, took no steps whatever, awaiting the conclusions of a commission of inquiry which had not even met. On July 5th, Lenin, in a conversation with Trotsky, raised the question, aren't they getting ready to shoot us all? Trotsky and Lenin just smoking a blunt, say, them niggas about to kill us, man. They about to blow our brains out, okay? Anyway, I'm sorry, that was funny. That was funny. Anyway, Lenin says to Trotsky on July 5th, aren't they getting ready to shoot us all? Only such an intention could explain the official stamp placed upon the monstrous slander. Lenin considered the enemy capable of carrying through to the end the scheme they had thought up and decided not to fall into their hands. On the evening of the 6th, Kerensky arrived from the front, all stuffed full of the suggestions of the generals, and demanded decisive measures against the Bolsheviks. At about 2 o'clock at night, the government resolved to bring to trial all the leaders of the armed insurrection and to disband the regiments which had taken part in the mutiny. The military detachment sent to the apartment of Lenin for purposes of search and arrest had to content itself with search, for the occupant had already left home. Lenin still remained in Petrograd, but hid in a worker's apartment, demanding that the Soviet Inquiry Commission hear him and Zinoviev in conditions precluding the danger of attack from the counter-revolution. In a declaration sent to the commission, Lenin and Zinoviev wrote, this morning, Friday, July 7th, it was communicated to Kamenev from the Duma that the commission was to go at 12 o'clock to an apartment agreed upon. We are writing these lines at 6:30 in the evening of July 7th, and we remark that up to now the commission has not appeared or given the slightest sign of its existence. The responsibility for the delay of the inquiry does not rest upon us. The disinclination of the Soviet Commission to begin the promised investigation finally convinced Lenin that the compromisers were washing their hands of the case and leaving it to the mercies of the White Guard. The officers and yunkers who had by that time broken up the party printing plants were now beating up and arresting in the street everyone who protested against the charge of espionage against the Bolsheviks. Lenin, therefore, finally decided to go into hiding, not from the investigation, but from possible attempts upon his life. Absolutely crazy. What did Boosie say? We too smart for this shit. We too hard for this shit. Hold on, wait. DA, don't search my house because ain't no motherfucking drugs there. We smart with this shit. We got retarded in this shit. Deuce up in my shoe. I set it off up in this bitch. That's what Lenin did. Lenin shook the fucking spot. Lenin shook the spot. He say, executive committee, don't search my house. Ain't no motherfucking drugs there. Hold on, wait. So yeah, basically, when the right wing can't actually counter any argument, when fascist and racist and white supremacists and our ideological enemies, our mortal enemies, can't make up a good argument, what do? They just start making shit up. And that's what they did against Lenin. They essentially said, we can't argue against that he's actually for the people. We can't argue that his position that the war should end is actually popular with the people. We can't argue against that we have been basically fucking over the Russian people. So what we're gonna do, just make up some shit. This nigga trans. This motherfucker trans. Can you believe it? Lenin was trans. Can you believe it? Lenin was a black woman. Can you believe that? And what does that do? Activate the fascist. Activate the right wing. What does that actually do? Activate the right wing, because nothing gets right wingers more riled up than lies. They love lies. Just tell a right winger a lie, and you could be an Indian in a computer shop somewhere, just typing all day MAGA bullshit, and you'll get all them fucking dumbasses to send you money. Just post up racist AI images all day, and you can get right wingers to give you money. Even if you're a black man in Nigeria saying, look at these fools. Look at these stupid MAGAs. Look at these stupid right wingers. Okay? All right, you have to send some people to the gulag, to the re-education camp. You're going back to the gulag. We got to go back to the gulag. You're going back to the gulag, gulag, gulag. Get your ass out of here, you right-wing bitch. Get your ass out of here, you stupid fascist. Get your ass out of here, you right-wing bitch. Get out of here, you fucking fascist. We gonna murder, 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 murder Nazis. We gonna murder, 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 murder Nazis. We gonna kill them Nazi bastards. We gonna kill them Nazi bastards. I'm sending motherfuckers to the right wing. Re-education camp, psych. We gonna send them bitches to the gulag. We gonna send them bitches to the gulag. Murder, 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 Nazis. Murder, 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 Nazis. That's exactly what we doing in this bitch. Let's continue here. All right. All right. All right. On the 15th, Lenin and Zinoviev explained in the Kronstadt Bolshevik paper, which the authorities had not dared to shut down, why they did not consider it possible to hand themselves over to the authorities. From a letter of the former Minister of Justice, Paraverzev, printed on Sunday in the newspaper Novoye Vremya, it has become perfectly clear that the case of the spy activities of Lenin and others was a perfectly deliberate frame-up by the party of counter-revolution. Paraverzev quite openly acknowledges that he put his circulation unverified accusations in order to arouse the rage, his verbatim expression of the soldiers against our party. This is the confession of yesterday's Minister of Justice. There is no guarantee of justice in Russia at this moment. To turn oneself over to the authorities would mean to put oneself in the hands of the Milikovs, Alinsky's, Paraverzev's, in the hands of infuriated counter-revolutionaries for whom the whole accusation against us is a mere episode in a civil war. In order to explain at this day the meaning of the phrase episode in a civil war, it is sufficient to remember the fate of Karl Liebknecht and Rosa Luxemburg. Lenin knew how to see ahead. Rest in peace, Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht. Yesterday, I forgot Karl Liebknecht's name, but rest in peace, Rosa Luxemburg. Will we have socialism or barbarism? Will we have socialism or barbarism? That is still the question of the day. Still the question of the day. Continuing here. While agitators of the hostile camp were telling 1,000 stories, Lenin is on a destroyer. Lenin has fled to Germany in a submarine, etc. The majority of the executive committee hastily condemned Lenin for avoiding an investigation, ignoring the political essence of the accusation and the pogrom situation in which, and for the sake of which, it was launched. The compromisers came out as champions of pure justice. This was the least inexpedient position of all those remaining open to them. A resolution of the executive committee on July 13th not only declared the conduct of Lenin and Zinoviev absolutely unpermissible, but also demanded of the Bolshevik faction an immediate, categorical, and clear condemnation of its leaders. The faction unanimously rejected the demands of the executive committee. However, in the Bolshevik ranks, at least in the upper circles, there were waverings on the subject of Lenin's avoiding an investigation. And among even the most extreme left compromisers, Lenin's disappearance caused downright indignation, and indignation not always hypocritical, either, as we see in the example of Sukhanov. The slanderous character of the material supplied by the secret police had not been subject to the slightest doubt in his mind, as we know from the beginning. The nonsensical accusation went up like smoke, he wrote. It had no confirmation, and people simply stopped believing it. But it remained a mystery for Sukhanov how Lenin could decide to avoid an inquiry. That was something wholly special, unexampled, incomprehensible. Any other mortal would have demanded a court and an investigation, no matter how unfavorable the circumstances. Yes, any other mortal, but no other mortal could have become an object of such raging hatred to the ruling classes. Lenin was not any other mortal, and did not for one moment forget the responsibility which rested on him. He knew how to draw all the inferences from a situation. And he knew how, in the name of those tasks to which he had consecrated his life, to ignore the oscillations of public opinion. Quixotism was just as foreign to him as posing. So, very interesting. So, some people in the Bolsheviks were saying, like, hey, we know these accusations that Lenin is trans, that Lenin is a black gay woman. We know these accusations, these rumors the right-wingers made up are false. But should we investigate Lenin's crotch? Should we see if he's got a nappy dugout? Should we see if that's, a black woman, a gay trans black woman under all that? Let's see Lenin's big black cock, is what some of the Bolsheviks were saying. That's what some of them were saying. And others were saying, like, no, don't even dignify this. But once again, there is this hint of danger. If they even play into this, if they even try to, validate this baseless accusation that Lenin was a gay black trans woman, radical communist, if they even dealt with that, that is only giving credence to it. And I think also this relates to how we should think about the courts and the American criminal justice system right now. All of my heroes either went to jail for political reasons, false accusations mostly, like Angela Davis, like Assata Shakur, like Huey P. Newton, like Bobby Seale. All of my heroes were accused of some crime that they obviously did not commit, but they were being politically railroaded. A lot of them went underground. Huey P. Newton, for some time, fled to Cuba. Assata Shakur famously fled to Cuba. Angela Davis went underground for some time when she was accused of a murder that she did not do. And it's incredible that Angela Davis is still walking around today. But part of the strategy of going underground is to not give political power or even legitimacy to the American criminal court system. What do we think about that? This is a question to the audience. If us leftists are organized and we start getting accused of crime and slander by this criminal justice system, is it better to face these accusations in court, which a lot of my heroes eventually did? Huey P. Newton famously beat the body that they put on him when they said that he murdered a police officer. Once again, showing that police officers lie and our criminal justice system is meant to railroad black men. But I digress. Should we give legitimacy to the courts by going into them? Such as, like Afeni Shakur with the Black Panther 21, who were accused of trying to, blow up buildings in New York City. And they successfully fought the federal government and won. An inspirational story. But is it also inspirational to say we don't give a fuck about those courts? The American criminal court system is not legitimate. We know that it's a racist institution. It's probably one of the most, identifiably racist institutions in America. Should we even give it legitimacy? This is an honest question to the leftist, and I should have put it in the poll. Because I'm thinking, if I were accused of killing a police officer, if I were accused of plotting some terroristic attack, you know what I'm saying? Would I rather have my day in court and argue against it, knowing that the odds are stacked against me, but I also have a voice? Or is it better to go underground and try to make it to Cuba and live like Assata? You know what I'm saying? But even that might be going away soon. So it's the end of an era, boys. It's the end of an era. Anyway, real question to the leftists out there. Anyway, I'm going to continue here. In company with Zinoviev, Lenin passed a number of weeks in the environs of Petrograd, in a forest near Sestroretsk. They had to spend the nights and find shelter from rain in a haystack, disguised as a fireman. Lenin crossed the Finland border on a locomotive and concealed himself in the apartment of a Helsingfors police chief, a former Petrograd worker. Afterward, he moved nearer the Russian border to Vyborg. From the end of September, he lived secretly in Petrograd. And on the day of the insurrection, he appeared after an almost 4 months absence in the open arena. July became a month of shameless, unbridled, and triumphant slander. By August, the slander had already begun to exhaust itself. Just a month after the attack was let loose, Tsereteli, ever true to himself, deemed it necessary to repeat at a session of the executive committee, "On the day after the arrest, I gave an oral answer to the questions of the Bolsheviks. And I said, the leaders of the Bolsheviks under indictment for inciting to insurrection on July 3rd through the 5th, I do not suspect of connection with the German staff. To say less than that would have been impossible. To say more would have been inexpedient. The press of the compromised parties went no farther than these words of Tsereteli. And since this press was at the same time bitterly denouncing the Bolsheviks as auxiliaries of German militarism, the voice of the compromisist papers merged politically with the outcry of all the rest of the press, which was speaking of the Bolsheviks not as auxiliaries of Ludendorff, but as hired agents. The highest notes in this chorus were sung by the cadets. Ruski Vedomosti, the paper of the liberal Moscow professors, printed a communication to the effect that in a search in the editorial offices of Pravda, a German letter had been found in which a baron from Gaparanda welcomes the activities of the Bolsheviks and foresees what legitimate rejoicing this will cause in Berlin. The German baron on the Finland border well knew what letters were needed by the Russian patriots. The press of cultivated society, defending itself against Bolshevik barbarism, was filled with such communication. Did the professors and lawyers believe their own words? To admit this, at least in regard to the leaders of the capital, would be to think far too little of their political intelligence, even if not considerations of principle or of psychological possibility. Mere business considerations alone ought to have revealed to them the vacuity of these accusations. And first of all financial considerations. The German government could obviously have helped the Bolsheviks, not with ideas, but with money. But money was just what the Bolsheviks did not have. The center of the party abroad during the war was struggling with cruel need. 100 francs was a big sum. The central organ was appearing once a month or once in 2 months, and Lenin was carefully counting the lines in order not to exceed his budget. The expenses of the Petrograd organization during the war years amounted to a few thousand rubles, which went mostly to the printing of illegal leaflets. In 2.5 years, only 300,000 copies of these leaflets were distributed in Petrograd. After the revolution, the inflow of members and of means increased, of course, remarkably. The workers were wonderfully ready to tax themselves for the Soviet and for the Soviet parties. Contributions, all kinds of dues, collections, and deductions on behalf of the Soviet, reported the lawyer Bramson, a Trudovik at the first Congress of the Soviets, began on the very first day after our revolution broke out. You could see the extraordinarily touching spectacle of an uninterrupted pilgrimage to us in the Tarai Palace, from early morning to late at night, bringing these contributions. As time went on, the workers were still more ready to make these deductions on behalf of the Bolsheviks. However, in spite of the swift growth of the party and of money receipts, Pravda was, in physical proportions, the smallest of all the party papers. Soon after his arrival in Russia, Lenin wrote to Radek in Stockholm, write articles for Pravda about foreign politics, extremely short and in the spirit of Pravda. There is very, very little space. We are trying hard to enlarge it. In spite of the Spartan regime of economy instituted by Lenin, the party was always in need. The disbursement of 2,000 or 3,000 wartime rubles on behalf of some local organization would mean always a serious problem for the Central Committee. In order to send papers to the front, it became necessary again and again to take out special collections among the workers. And even so, the Bolshevik papers arrived in the trenches in incomparably fewer number than the papers of the compromisers and liberals. Complaints about this were continual. We are living only on the rumor of your papers, wrote the soldiers. In April, a city conference of the party appealed to the workers of Petrograd to collect in 3 days the 75,000 rubles lacking for the purchase of a printing plant. The sum was more than covered, and the party finally acquired its own printing press, the same one which the Junkers shattered to the ground in July. The influence of the Bolshevik slogans spread like fire in the steppes, but the material instruments of their propaganda remained exceedingly scant. The personal lives of the Bolsheviks gave still less occasion for slander. What then remained? Nothing in the last analysis, but Lenin's trip through Germany. But that very fact advanced oftenest of all before inexperienced audiences as proof of Lenin's friendship with the German government, in reality proved the opposite. An agent would have traveled through the hostile territory concealed and without the slightest danger. Only a revolutionist, confident of himself to the last degree, would have dared openly to transgress the laws of patriotism in wartime. All right? So, once again, Plasma Zombie is coming in with the type of propaganda and bullshit thinking that right-wingers come with, claiming that Lenin was somehow involved in a secret Jewish plot to turn Russia, into the communist superstate. when literally at that time, literally we're reading this right now, word for word, the Russians at that time accused Lenin of being a German agent. Think about that. Think about how stupid you have to be as a right-winger to believe that the Jews secretly control the world, when literally at that time, the man who had ostensible Jewish heritage was proclaimed by the Russian enemies, by the Russian bourgeoisie, the rich capitalists, of essentially being a German spy. So what is it? So what is it? Right-wingers, what is it? Is Lenin a German spy, or is he a secret Jew who is somehow trying to control the world? Y'all make no fucking sense, and y'all are the stupidest people on the fucking planet. I swear, fascists, Nazis, anti-Semites, y'all are the dumbest people on the fucking planet, and it's absolutely embarrassing. I'd be ashamed to look in the mirror if I was that fucking stupid. I would literally take my own life. I would take my own life if I was that fucking stupid like you guys. Anyway, very interesting what Trotsky is saying here. What he is saying is that essentially, how could the Bolsheviks be funded by the Aryan super race Germans if they were always broke? Literally, they didn't have money to print their own newspapers. They had to continue to beg their members and the workers and the soldiers for money. Couldn't even get the papers out to where the people were. Okay? That's absolutely crazy. This makes me want to donate to my left-wing group, the CPUSA. If you're a leftist watching this, I encourage you to get involved with some group in your local community. And yeah, fund them, help fund them. All the meager money that we can muster against capital for our organizations is greatly, greatly needed. While here in Hungary, I'm helping by donating to 2 left-wing groups. And also, I pay my regular dues to the CPUSA. So I encourage all of you to get involved. Find your flavor of socialism. Find your flavor of communism and get involved with a group that is about that life and is also your flavor. You know what I mean? PSL, CPUSA, what is it? The Social Demo, what is the name of that party Zoran's in? Democratic Socialist, DSA. Get involved with something and pay your fucking dues, okay? Donate to your local chapter. Donate to your party. You know what I mean? Help fund it, okay? Because the right-wingers get money, ironically, from the same people they hate. Right-wingers love taking money from Zionists, and then they say that we are controlled by global Jewish cabals in capital. Oh, God. They're so fucking stupid. They're so fucking stupid, bro. One of the biggest donors to Donald Trump's campaign was, what is it? What is the name of that? Why is that name not coming to mind? The ADL. Not the ADL. What is the name? AIPAC. AIPAC. Why is AIPAC not coming to mind? Why is AIPAC not coming to mind? I'm going to keep it real. I have not been watching the news for the past few days because I've been so deep off in this book. But if I were to watch the regular news that I do watch, like Democracy Now!, et cetera, I'd be hearing more about AIPAC. But that's why it slipped my mind right now. I've been so deep off in study that I haven't had time to check on what's happening outside in the world. But I'm sure Israel is still up to no good. I'm sure America is still being wicked and all of that. Okay? So we're sending people out of here once again. We're sending people out of here, man. You know the worst thing about white people? The worst thing about white people is that they live in such a bubble that they think all black people look the same. How could I look like Michael B. Jordan when Michael B. Jordan has hair, nigga? Michael B. Jordan has hair, nigga. Niggas say that I look like Martin Lawrence. Martin Lawrence has hair, nigga. That white people are just so like living. I could not imagine just living in white world. That's the thing about white people, man. I tell this to Acti all the time. White people are like children. They're incapable of thinking outside of themselves. Like how we said yesterday, have you ever met somebody that said, "Oh, I never thought about it like that"? That's a lot of the times what it feels like talking to white people. All right, and all my white leftists, I'm also chatting it up with you too because there's a lot of blind spots in white leftism, et cetera, et cetera. But generally, if you're watching this and you get triggered, then that shows that you still have some growing to do. All right, white fragility will be the death of you, and will be the death of us as well. So that's why the fight against white supremacy also includes challenging white fragility. Okay, the same way I as a man have to accept criticism for the patriarchy, machismo, sexism that is endemic to our society shouldn't be that hard for white people to confront, a lot of the white chauvinism and white fragility that exists. But yeah, nigga, I cannot look like Michael B. Jordan or Martin Lawrence because them niggas got hair, okay? I think Michael B. Jordan has a beard. Okay, Michael B. Jordan is much more in shape than me. That's the thing. White people just see all black people looking the same. I could not imagine looking like that or thinking like that. You know what I'm saying? Someone's got the stars and bars in here. Oh yeah, you got to go to the gulag. You got to go to the execution. Dog, you would have to be killed. Love the father. Yeah, you need to go to the guillotine. You coming in here with the stars and bars. Oh my God, just offensive. Sir, I escaped the South. Sir, how dare you? Jesus Christ, niggas wearing the stars and bars proudly in their profiles. Niggas wearing the Southern Cross proudly in their profiles in 2026. I'm telling y'all, man, the KKK is still outside, man. That's why we are about this life. And that's why we gonna stand over some Nazis, point that shotgun in their face, and blow their fucking brains out. Can't wait for that day. Can't wait for that day we start, running up on some Klan members and giving them that business. Coming in here with the stars and bars in 2026, my guy, Jesus Christ. Someone should tackle you to the ground and really hurt you. Someone should tackle you to the ground and really hurt. Stars and bars. I am just, whoo, Lord Jesus. Anyway, I'm sorry. The Ministry of Justice, however, did not hesitate to carry out its unpleasant task. It had not for nothing inherited employees trained during the final period of the autocracy, when the murder of liberal deputies by Black Hundred agents, known by name to the whole country, would remain systematically undiscovered, while a Jewish salesman in Kiev would be accused of using the blood of a Christian boy over the signature of the investigator in the exceptionally important affair of Alexandrov and that of the Attorney General Kerensky. A decree was published on the 21st of July, indicting on a charge of state treason Lenin, Zinoviev, Kollontai, and a number of other people, among them the German Social Democrat Helfend Parvus. The same articles of the Criminal Code 51, 100, and 108 were afterward invoked in indicting Trotsky and Lunacharsky, arrested by military detachments on the 23rd of July. According to the text of the decree, the leaders of the Bolsheviks, being Russian citizens, did, according to a preliminary agreement between themselves and other parties, with the aim of aiding other states engaged in hostile activities within the borders of Russia, entered into an agreement with the agents of the said governments to cooperate in the disorganization of the Russian army and rear for the purpose of weakening the fighting power of the army, for which purpose, which monies received by them from these states, they did organize a propaganda among the population and troops, summoning them to an immediate refusal of military activity against the enemy. And they did also with the same ends in view during the period from the 3rd to the 5th of July, 1917, organized in Petrograd an armed insurrection. Although every educated person in those days, at least in the capital, knew in what circumstances Trotsky had come from New York through Christiania and Stockholm to Petrograd, the court of inquiry charged him also with having traveled through Germany. The Department of Justice evidently desired to leave no doubt as to the solidity of the materials from which had been placed at its disposition by the intelligence service. So yeah, the empire is striking back. The empire is striking back in full force. And once again, when right-wingers have no real argument, they just make up shit. For example, here, they knew Trotsky did not travel through Germany, yet and still they're charging Trotsky with traveling through Germany. Just making up shit. They knew he flew from New York. They knew he came from the east, and yet here they are saying he came from the west. Absolutely insane. Anyway, the latter institution has nowhere been a propagator of good morals, but in Russia, the intelligence service was the very sewer of the Rasputin regime. The scum of the military officers, the police, the gendarme, together with discharged agents of the secret police, formed the cadres of that foul, stupid, and all-powerful institution. Colonels, captains, and ensigns who were useless for military deeds took under their supervision all branches of the social and governmental life, establishing throughout the country a system of spy feudalism. The situation became absolutely catastrophic, complains a former director of police, Kurlov. when the notorious intelligence service began to take part in the affairs of civil administration. Krylov himself has no little dirty business to his credit. Among other things, an indirect participation in the murder of the Prime Minister Stolypin. Nevertheless, the activities of the intelligence service made even his experienced imagination shudder. During the time when the struggle with enemy espionage was being carried on very weakly, he writes, notoriously framed up cases would frequently come down upon the heads of completely innocent people with the aim of naked blackmail. Krylov ran into one such case. To my horror, he says, I heard the pseudonym of a secret agent known to me in my former service with the police department as having been expelled for blackmail. One of the provincial heads of the intelligence service, a certain Ustinov, a notary before the war, describes the morals of this service in his memoirs in practically the same terms as those used by Krylov. In search of something to do, the agents themselves would manufacture material. Okay? So, let's go here, put some people out of here. Grimhead, how many people died during the transatlantic slave trade? He's not going to be able to answer. He's in the gulag. He won't be able to answer. Anyway, continuing here. Trotsky is pointing out that, the government is making up this case against them, and also this is headed by their intelligence services. The intelligence services are, essentially made up of a bunch of the misfits and losers from the military who ended up getting kicked out, okay? All right, we're going to send some more people out of here. I love it. We're going to kick some more people out of here. Anyway, the intelligence services are essentially, just made up of losers and misfits, et cetera, et cetera. And this goes back to a question I asked earlier in the live stream. Should us leftists be afraid of the FBI, CIA, ATF, all the other secret intelligence services, et cetera, et cetera? And I would argue, no, we shouldn't be afraid, because first and foremost, our propaganda should be aimed at all workers, and that includes those who work for the government agencies. So these people need to know that they're being exploited as well and working for a white supremacist, capitalist, exploitative, state. And so, yeah, our propaganda should be aimed at them, and the gun will come to us. Us leftists don't need to be, doing paramilitary drills and activities all day and time with real rifles and shit like three-tooth rednecks out in Kentucky, preparing for a holy race war, whatever. The gun will come to us if our propaganda is good enough. So first and foremost, no, we shouldn't be scared of the intelligence agencies, because they will be on our side as well. Secondly, I think the same thing still applies today. There have been many, agents, people recruited by the CIA, FBI, et cetera, who have proven themselves to be incompetent. The CIA is not insurmountable. It's not undefeatable, as we saw in Vietnam, as we saw in Cuba with the Bay of Pigs, as we have seen in several other countries that have tried to resist American imperialism, like we're witnessing right now in Iran. If you don't think the CIA or other intelligence agencies are not involved in toppling the Iranian regime, you're crazy. You're absolutely crazy. The Iranian regime is resisting the power of American imperialism and all of our intelligence services, So yeah, it's very possible to defeat these agencies from within and from without, as Trotsky would say. So I don't think any fear should be had. We should take inspiration and cues from those who have successfully defeated American empire, such as all the countries and peoples and movements that I've listed before. But I digress. Let's continue here. It is still more instructive to verify the intellectual level of the institution by the example of this very accuser. Russia went to ruin, writes Ustinov, speaking of the February Revolution, the victim of a revolution created by German agents on German money. The attitude of the patriotic notary to the Bolsheviks needs no further explanation. The reports of the intelligence service as to the former activities of Lenin, as to his connection with the German staff, as to his receipt of German gold, are convincing enough to hang him immediately. Kerensky did not do this, it would seem, only because he was himself a traitor. Especially astonishing, and even downright exasperating, was the leadership of a good-for-nothing lawyer among the Yids. Sashka Kerensky. Ustinov testifies that Kerensky was well known as a provocateur who betrayed his comrades. The French general Anselm, as was later found out, abandoned Odessa in March 1919, not under pressure from the Bolsheviks, but because he reached an immense bribe. From the Bolsheviks, no. The Bolsheviks had nothing to do with it, said Ustinov. Here, the Freemasons were at work. Such was that world. Okay. Okay, all right. Soon after the February Revolution, this institution, consisting of sharpers, falsificators, and blackmailers, was put in charge of a patriotic social revolutionary, Mironov, who had arrived from abroad and whom an assistant minister, Demyanov, a people's socialist, characterized in the following words. Mironov creates a good impression externally, but I shall not be surprised if I learn that this is not a wholly normal person. It is quite possible to believe he is not. A normal person would hardly have agreed to stand at the head of an institution which ought to have been simply disbanded and its walls washed with sublimate. As a result of that administrative mix-up caused by the revolution, the intelligence service came under the supervision of the Minister of Justice, Paraverzev, a man of incredible light-mindedness and complete indifference to the means he employed. The same Demyanov says in his memoirs that his ministers enjoyed almost no prestige at all in the Soviet. Under the protection of Mironov and Paraverzev, the intelligence men, frightened at first by the revolution, soon came to themselves and accommodated their old activities to the new political situation. In June, even the left wing of the governmental press began to publish information about blackmail and other crimes committed by the highest ranks of the intelligence service, even including two chiefs of the institution, Shukin and Broy, first assistants of the miserable Mironov. A week before the July crisis, the executive committee, under pressure from the Bolsheviks, had addressed a demand to the government for an immediate inspection of the intelligence service with the participation of Soviet representatives. The intelligence men thus had their own departmental reasons, or rather reasons of livelihood, for striking at the Bolsheviks as quickly and as hard as possible. Prince Lvov had signed a timely law giving the intelligence service the right to hold an arrestee under lock and key for 3 months. All right. The character of the accusation and of the accusers inevitably gives rise to the question, how could people of normal mold believe or even pretend to believe in this notorious lie, which was inept from beginning to end? The success of the intelligence service would, in truth, have been unthinkable, except for the general atmosphere created by war, defeat, ruin, revolution, and the embitterment of the social struggle. Since the autumn of 1914, nothing had gone well with the ruling classes of Russia. The ground was crumbling under their feet. Everything was falling from their hands. Misfortunes were coming down on them from all directions. How could they help seeking a scapegoat? The former Attorney General, Zavdasky, remembers that entirely healthy people were inclined in the alarming years of the war to suspect treachery where it apparently and even indubitably was not to be found. The majority of the cases of this kind prosecuted while I was Attorney General were fanciful. These cases were initiated not only by spiteful agents, but by ordinary Philistines who had lost their heads. But often, too, the war psychosis united with the pre-revolutionary political fever to produce even more freakish fruits. The liberals, in common with the unsuccessful generals, sought everywhere and in everybody for the hand of the Germans. The court Camarilla had been considered Germanified. The whole clique of Rasputin had been believed, or at least declared by the liberals, to be under instructions from Potsdam. The Tsarina had been widely and openly accused of espionage. She had been held responsible even in court circles for the sinking by Germans of the vessel in which General Kitchener was coming to Russia. The Wrights, it goes without saying, were not slow to pay back the debt. Zadovsky relates how the Assistant Minister of the Interior, Beletsky, attempted early in 1916 to bring a charge against the national liberal industrialist Guchkov, accusing him of activities bordering upon state treason in wartime. In exposing the performances of Beletsky, Krylov, also a former Assistant Minister of the Interior, in his turn, put the question to Milikov. For what honorable work in behalf of the fatherland did he, Milikov, receive 200,000 rubles of Finnish money from Finland, transferred to him by mail in the name of the janitor of his house. The quotation marks around Finland are supposed to show that it was really a question of German money. But nevertheless, Milikov had a well-earned reputation for Germanophobia. In governmental circles, it was generally considered as proven that all the opposition parties were operating with German money. In August 1915, when disturbances were expected in connection with the dissolution of the Duma, the naval minister, Grigorovich, considered to be almost a liberal, said at a session of the government, the Germans are conducting a reinforced propaganda and showering the anti-government organizations with money. The Octoberists and cadets, although indignant at these insinuations, nevertheless never thought of fending them off in a leftward direction. On the subject of a semi-patriotic speech of the Menshevik Chedsi at the beginning of the war, the president of the Duma, Rodzianko, wrote, subsequent events prove the closeness of Chedsi to German circles. You will wait in vain for the slightest shadow of such proof. Okay, so going to the text right here, I have a comment that I want to make. What I find interesting right here is, Trotsky is making the case that essentially all of the German bourgeois parties were being funded or being in close connection with German money, German capital, German interest. As he spoke about in the early chapters of Volume 1, the court of Nicholas II were all Germanophiles. They loved speaking German, they loved German clothes, German music, German culture, etc., right? Meanwhile, they were telling people to go out and fight and die for the glory of Russia. So make that make sense. I also think it's very interesting here how, once again, right-wingers and the bourgeois liberals accuse us leftists, communists, socialists of being funded from elsewhere. You must be getting money from China or Russia. If I was getting money from China or Russia, would I be wearing this cheap shit? Would I be wearing this cheap shit if I was getting money from China or Russia? Or would any of the left-wing parties, ostensibly in the United States, be struggling to pay the rent? Would they, if we were getting funding from China or Russia? Didn't Chairman O'Malley just recently beat a case where they accused him of being a Russian agent? Shout out to Chairman O'Malley, one of my early radicalizers. Shout out to Chairman O'Malley. But yeah, they accuse us of being funded by outside countries, sources, and interests. Meanwhile, they literally take AIPAC blood money. Literally, liberals, Democrats, right-wing conservative Republicans they love the shekels. They love the shekels. They love the shekels from AIPAC. Recently, what was it? In Kentucky or Tennessee, there was this guy, I think his name was Tom Massey, right-wing dumbass, who was in a primary contest against another right-wing dumbass whose name I forgot. But Tom Massey got his ass blew out the water because he was speaking out against AIPAC. And on top of that, Trump didn't endorse him because he was speaking out against AIPAC, even though Tom Massey was a full-on MAGA fucking reactionary retard. So make that make sense. Make that make sense. Republicans love Jewish money. Sorry, Zionist money. Though technically, a lot of the Zionists that are funding AIPAC are technically Jewish people. But, I would argue the majority of hardcore Zionists are actually Christian American conservatives. But I digress. Republicans love it. Zionists love funding right-wingers. They also fund, the Democrats as well. But it's very interesting. Very interesting, once again. They find no contradiction in their mind. There's no cognitive dissonance to the idea. There is no cognitive dissonance to the idea that the right-wingers can literally take money from AIPAC, but then accuse us leftists of being somehow funded from outside sources. They have all the money in the world, and we have none of it. And still, we're being funded. We're being funded. Make it make sense. Okay? So, continuing here. In his commentary of the Second Russian Revolution, Milikov says, the role of the dark sources in the revolution of February 27th is wholly unclear, but judging by all that followed, it is difficult to deny it. Peter Struve, a former Marxist and now a reactionary Slavophile of German origin, expresses himself more decisively. When the Russian Revolution planned and created by Germany succeeded, Russia had to all intents and purposes, withdrawn from the war. Like Milikov, Struve is here speaking not of October, but of the February Revolution. On the subject of the famous Order Number 1, the Magna Carta of soldier liberties drawn up by the delegates of the Petrograd garrison, Rodzianko wrote, "I have not the slightest doubt of the German origin of Order Number 1. The chief of one of the divisions, General Barkovsky, told Rodzianko that Order Number 1 was supplied to his troops in enormous quantities from the German trenches. When he became war minister, Guchkov, whom they had tried to indict for state treason under the Tsar, hastened to switch this accusation to the left. The April orders of Guchkov to the army read, 'Persons who hate Russia and are undoubtedly in the service of our enemies have penetrated into the active army with the persistent characteristics of our enemies, and evidently in fulfillment of their demands, are preaching the necessity of ending the war as soon as possible.' On the subject of the April manifestation, which was directed against an imperialist policy, Milikov writes, 'The task of removing both ministers, Milikov and Guchkov, was directly imposed by Germany, and the workers got 15 rubles a day from the Bolsheviks for taking part in the demonstration.' With this key of German gold, the liberal historian unlocks all those enigmas against which he bumped his head as a politician. The patriotic socialists who baited the Bolsheviks as involuntary allies, if not agents of the German ruling circles, were themselves under the same accusation from the right. We have seen what Rodzianko said about Chetsi. He did not even spare Kerensky himself. It was he, undoubtedly, who, through secret sympathy for the Bolsheviks, but perhaps also because of other considerations, impelled the Provisional Government to admit the Bolsheviks into Russia. Other considerations can mean nothing but a partiality for German gold. In his curious memoirs, which have been translated into foreign languages, the general of gendarmes, Spiridovich, remarking upon the abundance of Jews in the ruling circle of the social revolutionaries, adds, "Among them, Russian names also glimmered, such as the future rural minister, the German spy, Viktor Chernov. And it was by no means only this gendarme who suspected the leader of the Social Revolutionary Party. After the July pogrom of the Bolsheviks, the cadets lost no time in raising a hue and cry against the Minister of Agriculture, Chernov, a man suspected by connections with Berlin, and the unhappy patriot had to resign temporarily in order to exonerate himself." Speaking in the autumn of 1917 on the instructions given by the Patriotic Executive Committee to the Menshevik Skobelev for his participation in an international socialist conference, Milikov, in the Tribune of the pre-parliament, demonstrated by means of a meticulous syntactical analysis of its text the obvious German origin of the document. That's ridiculous. So what he's basically saying is that this guy is literally trying to read between the lines, okay? He is literally trying to read between the lines and just say, this looks like it was written by a German hand. How else? Anyway, the style of the instructions, as indeed of all the compromisist literature, was, as a fact, bad. The belated democracy, without ideas, without will, glancing around, affrighted on all sides, piled up qualification after qualification in its writings, until they sounded like a bad translation from a foreign language, just as the democracy itself was, indeed, the shadow of a foreign past. Ludendorff, however, is not in the least to blame for that. The journey of Lenin through Germany offered inexhaustible possibilities for chauvinist dogmatism. But as though to demonstrate beyond a doubt the purely instrumental role of patriotism in their policies, the bourgeois press, after having at first met Lenin with a hypocritical goodwill, started their licentious attack upon his Germanophilism only after his social program had become clear. Land, bread, and peace. Those slogans he could only have brought from Germany. At that time, there were still no revelations of Ermolenko. After Trotsky and several other immigrants returning from America had been arrested by the military authorities of King George in the latitude of Halifax, the British ambassador in Petrograd gave to the press an official communication in a quite inimitable Anglo-Russian language. Those Russian citizens of the steamer Christiana Ford were detained in Halifax because it was communicated to the British government that they had connections with a plan subsidized by the German government to overthrow the Russian Provisional Government. Buchanan's communication was dated April 14th. At that time, neither Bernstein nor Ermolenko had appeared upon the horizon. Milikov, in his capacity of Minister of Foreign Affairs, found himself obliged, however, to request the British government through the Russian ambassador Nabokov to liberate Trotsky and permit him to come to Russia. Knowing of Trotsky's activities in America, writes Nabokov, the British government was perplexed. Is this ill will or blindness? The Englishmen shrugged their shoulders, understood the danger, gave us warning. Lloyd George, however, was compelled to yield. In answer to a question put by Trotsky to the British ambassador in the Petrograd press, Buchanan took back in some embarrassment his first explanation, and this time announced, "My government detained the group of immigrants in Halifax only for the purpose of, and until, the establishment of their identity by the Russian government." That is the whole story of the detaining of the Russian immigrants. Buchanan was not only a gentleman, but also a diplomat. At a conference of members of the State Duma early in June, Milikov, having been pushed out of the government by the April demonstration, demanded the arrest of Lenin and Trotsky, unequivocally hinting at their connections with Germany. On the following day, at the Congress of the Soviets, Trotsky declared, "Until Milikov confirms or withdraws this accusation, he wears the brand of a dishonest slanderer." Milikov answered in the newspaper, Wretch, that he was, in truth, dissatisfied that the messengers, Lenin and Trotsky, are at liberty, but that he had motivated the demand for their arrest not on the ground that they are agents of Germany, but that they have sufficiently violated the criminal code. Milikov was a diplomat without being a gentleman. The necessity of arresting Lenin and Trotsky had been perfectly clear to him before the revelations of Ermolenko. The juridical dressings of the arrest were a mere question of technique. The leaders of the liberals had been playing with the sharp blade of this accusation long before it was set in motion in a juridical form. So what Trotsky is saying here is that they had been planned to arrest Lenin and Trotsky even before this, double agent who got co-opted by the Germans ended up coming over and saying that, hey, Lenin's a German spy too. You get what I'm saying? So they had been planning on this, and they just needed reason to do it. Similar to how the Chicago police, with the help of the FBI, murdered Fred Hampton for what, God knows what, but they made up some reason to raid his house and shoot a man while he was sleeping, okay? But I digress. Let's continue here. The role of the myth of German gold becomes more obvious of all in a colorful episode described by the general administrator of the Provisional Government, the cadet Nabokov, not to be confused with the Russian ambassador in London mentioned above. In one of these sittings of the government, Milikov, speaking on some other question, remarked, "It is no secret to anybody that German money played its role among the factors promoting the revolution." That was quite in the character of Milikov, although the formula was obviously softened. Kerensky, according to Nabokov's report, went into a rage. He seized his portfolio and, slamming it down on the table, cried out, "Since Milikov has dared in my presence to slander the sacred cause of the great Russian Revolution, I do not wish to remain here another minute." That is wholly in the character of Kerensky, although his gestures were perhaps a little exaggerated. A Russian proverb advises us not to spit in the well from which we may have to drink. When he was offended by the October Revolution, Kerensky could think of nothing better to use against it than this myth of German gold. That which in Milikov's mouth had been a slander against a sacred cause became for Kerensky in the mouth of Bernstein the sacred cause of slandering the Bolsheviks. The unbroken chain of suspicions of Germanophilism and espionage, extending from the Tsarina, Rasputin, and the court circles, through the ministry, the staffs, the Duma, the liberal newspapers, to Kerensky and a number of the Soviet leaders, strikes one most of all by its monotony. The political enemies seem to have firmly resolved not to overwork their imaginations. They simply switch the same old accusations from one point to another, the movement being predominantly from right to left. The July slander against the Bolsheviks, least of all, fell down out of a clear sky. It was the natural fruit of panic and hate, the last link in a shameful chain, the transfer of a stereotyped slanderous formula to its new and final object, permitting a reconciliation of the accusers and the accused of yesterday. All the insults of the ruling group, all their fears, all their bitterness were now directed against that party that stood at the extreme left and incarnated most completely the unconquerable force of the revolution. Was it, in actual fact, possible for the possessing classes to surrender their place to the Bolsheviks without having made a last desperate effort to trample them in the blood and filth? That tangle of slander, well snarled up from long usage, was inevitably fated to come down on the heads of the Bolsheviks. The revelations of the retired ensign from the intelligence service were only a materialization of the ravings of possessing classes who found themselves in a blind alley. For that reason, the slander acquired such frightful force. The idea of German agentry was not in itself, to be sure, mere raving. The German espionage in Russia was incomparably better organized than the Russian in Germany. All right? It is sufficient to recall the fact that the war minister Sukhomlinov was arrested even under the old regime as the trusted man of Berlin. It is also indubitable that German agents inserted themselves not only into the court and black country circles, but also among the lefts. The Austrian and German governments had flirted from the first days of the war with separatist tendencies, beginning among the Ukrainian and Caucasian immigrants. It is interesting that Ermolenko, recruited in April 1917, was sent over to struggle for the secession of the Ukraine. As early as 1914, both Lenin and Trotsky in Switzerland had demanded in print a break with those revolutionists who were getting caught on the hook of Austro-German militarism. Early in 1917, Trotsky repeated this printed warning to the left, German Social Democrats, the followers of Liebknecht, with whom agents of the British Embassy were trying to establish connections, but in flirting with separatists in order to weaken Russia and frighten the Tsar. The German government was far from the thought of overthrowing Tsarism. The best evidence of this is a proclamation scattered in the Russian trenches after the February Revolution and read on March 11th at a session of the Petrograd Soviet. At the beginning, the English joined hands with your Tsar. Now they have turned against him because he would not agree to their self-interested demands. They have overthrown your Tsar, given to you by God. Why has this happened? Because he understood and divulged the faults and crafty schemes of the English. Both the form and contents of this document give internal guarantee of its genuineness. Just as you cannot imitate a Prussian lieutenant, so you cannot imitate his historic philosophy. Hoffman, a Russian lieutenant with a general's rank, imagined that the Russian Revolution was thought up by its foundation laid in England. In that, however, there is less absurdity than in the theory of Milikov and Struve, for Potsdam continued to the end to hope for a separate peace with Zarko Selo, while in London they feared more than anything else a separate peace between them. Only when the impossibility of restoring the Tsar became wholly obvious did the German staff transfer its hopes to the disintegrating power of the revolutionary process. Even in the matter of Lenin's trip through Germany, the initiative came not from German circles, but from Lenin himself. In its very first form, indeed, from the Menshevik, Martov. The German staff only consented to it, and that probably not without hesitation. Ludendorff said to himself, perhaps relief will come from that side. Okay, very interesting what Trotsky's saying here. Basically, he's just laying down some World War I politics, essentially saying that, there was no connection, there was no actual connection to intelligence agencies from abroad by Lenin. Even when these connections were attempted to be made, they were insufficient and, not a route that the intelligence agencies of foreign countries trying to infiltrate Russia could work through. You get what I'm saying? At least in terms of dealing with the Bolsheviks. Water break. Okay. All right. Continuing here. During the July events, the Bolsheviks themselves sought for an alien and criminal hand in certain unexpected excesses that were obviously provoked with malice aforethought. Trotsky wrote in those days, "What role has been played in this by counter-revolutionary provocation and German agents? It is difficult at present to pronounce definitely upon this question. We must await the results of an authentic investigation. But even now, it is possible to say with certainty that the results of such an investigation will throw a clear light upon the work of Black Hundred gangs and upon the underground role played by Gold, German, English, or 100% Russian, or indeed all three of them. But no judicial investigation will change the political meaning of the events. The worker and soldier masses of Petrograd were not and could not have been bought. They are not in the service of Wilhelm or Buchanan or Milikov. The movement was prepared by the war, by oncoming hunger, by the reaction lifting its head, by the headlessness of the government, by the adventurous offensive, by the political distrust and revolutionary alarm of the workers and soldiers. All the material in the archives, the documents and memoirs, which have become public since the war and the two revolutions, prove beyond a doubt that the partiality of German agents for the revolutionary processes in Russia did not for one moment rise out of the military police sphere into the sphere of big politics. Is there, by the way, any need of insisting upon this after the revolution in Germany itself? How pitiful and impotent did these supposedly all-powerful Hohenzollern, or German, agents turn out to be in the autumn of 1918 in the face of the German workers and soldiers? The calculation of our enemy in sending Lenin to Russia was absolutely right, says Milikov. Ludendorff himself quite otherwise estimates the results of the undertaking. I could not suppose, so he justifies himself, speaking of the Russian Revolution, that it would become the tomb of our own might. This merely means that of the two strategists, Ludendorff, who permitted Lenin to go, and Lenin, who accepted his permission, Lenin saw farther and better. All right, let's go here. We have to send some more people to the gulag. Sending people to the gulag. Anyway, continuing here. Trotsky says, the enemy propaganda and Bolshevism, complains Ludendorff in his memoirs, were seeking one and the same goal within the boundaries of the German state. England gave opium to China. Our enemies gave us revolution. Ludendorff attributes to the Entente the same thing of which Milikov and Kerensky were accusing Germany. Thus cruelly does the insulted reason of history avenge itself. But Ludendorff did not stop there. In February 1931, he informed the world that behind the back of the Bolsheviks stood international and especially Jewish finance capital. So finally, they end up on anti-Semitism. Okay, finally. Okay, gotta actually end up with anti-Semitism. Eventually, it always ends up there. So here comes the first accusation. Okay, gotta drink some water. All right, hold on. All right, thus cruelly does the insulted reasons of history avenge itself. But Ludendorff did not stop there. In February 1931, he informed the world that behind the back of the Bolsheviks stood international and especially Jewish finance capital, united in the struggle against Tsarist Russia and imperialist Germany. Trotsky arrived in Petrograd from America through Sweden, provided with great supplies of the money of international capitalists. Other monies were supplied to the Bolsheviks by the Jew Solmsen from Germany. Ludendorff's Volkswort, February 15, 1931. However, the testimonies of Ludendorff and Ermolenko may disagree. They coincide in one point. A part of the money did actually come from Germany, not from Ludendorff. It is true, but from his mortal enemy, Solmsen. Only the testimony was lacking to provide an aesthetic finish to the whole question. Okay. All right, hold on. Might need to take a longer water break. All right. Hold on. Page 579 is where we're at right now. All right. We only have a few more pages of this chapter. 579 is where we're at right now. So we're going to be shutting off this live stream soon. It's just give me a minute. I'm going to take like, let's say 10 minutes. Oops, almost busted myself on the head with this glass. Okay, I'm going to give myself like 10 minutes to like let my voice come back to finish off these last few pages because we've been going very hard for the past, hour and a half or so. Give me 10 minutes. I'm going to clip this out in the playback, and then we're going to wrap up these last few sections. So I'm just going to take a quick step away. Okay, so I feel better now. I feel better. Let's try and knock out the remaining pages right here, and let's start. But not Ludendorff, nor yet Milikov, nor Kerensky invented this device, although they first made a broad use of it. Solmsen has many predecessors in history, both as Jew and as German agent. Count Fersen, a Swedish ambassador in France during the Great Revolution, a passionate partisan of the monarchical power of the king, and more especially of the queen, more than once sent to the government in Stockholm such communications as the following. The Jew, Ephraim, an emissary of Herzberg in Berlin, the Prussian Minister of Foreign Affairs, is supplying them, the Jacobins, with money. Not long ago, he received another 600,000 livres. The moderate newspaper Les Révolutions de Paris made the supposition that during the Republican Revolution, emissaries of the European diplomats, such as, for instance, the Jew Ephraim, an agent of the Prussian king, made their way into the volatile and fickle crowd. The same Fersen reported the Jacobins would have perished, but for the help of the rabble bribed by them. If the Bolsheviks paid daily wages to the participants in that demonstration, they only followed the example of the Jacobins. And moreover, the money for bribing the rabble came in both cases from a source in Berlin. This similarity in the action of revolutionists in the 20th and 18th centuries would be striking, were it not outweighed by a more striking similarity in the slanders peddled by their enemies. But we need not limit ourselves to the Jacobins. The history of all revolutions and civil wars invariably testifies that a threatened or an overthrown ruling class is disposed to find the cause of the misfortunes, not in itself, but in foreign agents and emissaries. Not only Milikov in his character as a learned historian, but even Kerensky in his character as a superficial reader of history must be aware of this. However, in their character as politicians, they were victims of their own counter-revolutionary functions. Under these theories about the revolutionary role of foreign agents, as under all typical mass misunderstandings, there lies an indirect historical foundation. Consciously or unconsciously, every nation at the critical period of its existence makes especially broad and bold borrowings from the treasury of other peoples. Not infrequently, moreover, a leading role in the progressive movement is played by people living on the border or emigrants returning to the homeland. The new ideas and institutions thus appear to the conservative strata, first of all, as alien, as foreign inventions. The village against the city, the backwoods against the capital, the petty bourgeois against the worker. They all defend themselves under the guise of a national force resisting foreign influence. Milikov portrayed the Bolsheviks movement as German, for the same reason in the last analysis that the Russian muzhik has for 100 years regarded as a German any man dressed up in city clothes. The difference is that the music was making an honest mistake. In 1918, that is, after the October Revolution, a press bureau of the American government triumphantly published a collection of documents connecting the Bolsheviks with the Germans. This crude forgery, which would not stand up under a breath of criticism, was believed in by many educated and perspicacious people until it was discovered that the originals of the documents, supposed to have been drawn up in different countries, were all written on the same machine. The forgers did not stand on ceremony with their customers. They were obviously confident that the political demand for exposures of the Bolsheviks would outweigh the voice of criticism, and they made no mistake. And they made no mistake. And they made no mistake, for they were well paid for the documents. However, the American government, separated by an ocean from the scene of the struggle, was only secondarily interested in this matter. Shout out to Ancient Spirit up in the live stream. Shout out to you. And everybody else joining the live stream. Pardon, I need some water. All right. But why, after all, is political slander so poor and monotonous? But why, after all, is political slander as such so poor and monotonous? Because the social mind is economical and conservative. Let's repeat. Trotsky says, the social mind is economical and conservative. It does not expend more efforts than are necessary for its goal. It prefers to borrow the old when not compelled to create the new. But even when so compelled, it combines with it elements of the old. Each successive religion has created no new mythology, but has merely repersonified the superstitions of the past. In the same manner, philosophical systems are created, and doctrines of law and morals. Separate individuals, even those possessed of genius, develop in the same inharmonious way as the society which nourishes them. A bold imagination lives in the same skull with a slavish adherence to trite images. Audacious flights reconcile themselves with crude prejudices. Shakespeare nourished his creative genius upon subjects handed down from the deep ages. Pascal used the theory of probability to demonstrate the existence of God. Newton discovered the law of gravitation and believed in the apocalypse. After Marconi had established a wireless station in the residence of the Pope, the Vicar of Christ distributed his mystic blessing by radio. In ordinary times, these contradictions do not rise above a condition of drowsiness, but in times of catastrophe, they acquire explosive force. When it comes to a threat against their material interest, the educated classes set in motion all the prejudices and confusion that humanity is dragging in its wagon train behind it. Can we too much blame the lords of old Russia if they built the mythology of their fall out of indiscriminate borrowings from those classes which were overthrown before them? To be sure, the circumstance that Kerensky resurrects the tale of Ermolenko in his memoirs many years after the event is, to say the least, superfluous. The slander of those years of war and revolution was striking. We remarked in its monotony. However, it does contain a variation. From the piling up of quantity, we get a new quality. The struggle of the other parties among themselves was almost like a family spat in comparison with their common baiting of the Bolsheviks. In conflict with one another, they were, so to speak, only getting in training for a further conflict, a decisive one. Even in employing against each other the sharpened accusation of German connections, they never carried the thing through to the limit. July presents a different picture. So we have our final paragraph coming up here. If you have any comments or questions for me, put it in the chat. I will try to get to it before we get out of here. Final paragraph right here, and then we're shutting down the live stream, and I give my final commentary. Let's go. In the assault upon the Bolsheviks, all the ruling forces, the government, the courts, the intelligence service, the staffs, the officialdom, the municipalities, the parties of the Soviet majority, their press, their orators, constituted one colossal unit. The very disagreements among them, like the different tone qualities of the instruments in an orchestra, only strengthened the general effect. An inept invention of two contemptible creatures was elevated to the height of a factor in history. The slander is poured down like Niagara. If you take into consideration the setting, the war and the revolution, and the character of the accused revolutionary leaders of millions who were conducting their party to the sovereign power, you can say without exaggeration that July 1917 was the month of the most gigantic slander in world history. Okay, that's a little bit hyperbolic. Trotsky. The biggest slander is the slander against black people, that we are not human. I think that's the world's greatest slander. But if you're talking about against an individual, sure, why not? Anyway, Trotsky makes some very good points for us to leave with, like I thought he would do. Trotsky spoke about how the Bolsheviks countered misinformation and disinformation of their time, which was basically to go underground, to run away, to not dignify it in the courts. I don't know what will happen later if they actually go through with it, but essentially it's just deny, and hide, especially when you have the power, you know what I'm saying, because the Soviets were still building power. The goal was to just survive. They didn't want to turn Petrograd into the Petrograd Commune. They wanted the Soviet Union of states, the Soviet Union of socialist states. Yeah, that's a very interesting paragraph. Another thing that I took from it is that Trotsky is saying that, propaganda is monotonous. It's boring. Once again, it is very boring how the right wing continues to rehash the same sort of bullshit narratives. It is very boring, and that's why I don't even engage with right-wingers on my channel. I don't even engage with them because they're just going to say the same stupid bullshit. It's just boring bullshit, and that's why I don't even try to fight with them. So that's it. We're wrapping up this live stream. This has been episode 27, reading chapter 26 of Trotsky's The History of the Russian Revolution. Hopefully you enjoyed it. I'm going to shut down the polls. Let's see what the results were, just to make sure we got some good results. Hold on. I'm pretty sure the results are going to be pretty bad because we had a lot of right-wingers up in here. We had a whole lot of right-wingers. So let's go here. If Trotsky had succeeded Lenin, the USSR would have been more successful, 36% of the votes, with the majority of the... Oh, God. I hate that. I closed the poll. So now I can't see the results. Sorry, everybody, if you were waiting to see the results of the poll. Because now when I close it, YouTube just makes it impossible to see. I really wanted to see the results of the poll. Maybe I can go to the live section here. Okay. Let's go to studio. See if I can see it in studio. I would like to know what y'all thought. Here it is. If Trotsky had succeeded Lenin, the USSR would have been more successful with 36% of the vote. Unsure, but fuck Trump and MAGA with 30% of the vote. I'm happy about that. Less successful, 17%. Had the same amount of success with 17%. So yeah, more successful tended to win out. But it seems to be a tie between less successful and have had the same amount of success, because those two questions are sort of like both, have the same amount of success. The Soviet Union was very successful. Anyway, I'm very happy that fuck Trump and MAGA got at least 30% of the vote. So that's good. So more successful is the winner. I'll take that as a win. And also fuck Trump and MAGA in second place. I always like that. That's always good. Okay? Anyway, y'all be easy out there. All power to the people. And peace.